Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Gergana Nikolova, and I'm the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia for the Adventure Travel Trade Association, or as we call it, ATTA for short. I've been part of the company for over 7 years, and the majority of my career and education have been on responsible tourism development. Now my role and activities lead the work that ATTA does in Europe and Central Asia. And before I pass it to our great interviewee here today, David, I would like to comment about who ATTA is. ATTA has been in the driver's seat of inspiring the development of adventure and outdoor responsible tourism throughout the globe for over 15 years. We bring the people behind it together, we feed them with insights and inspiration, and support their activities in facilitating new business opportunities and promoting adventure tourism opportunities in destinations. Before we go into more specifics about today's interview, I would like to comment on the definition of adventure travel that our industry uses. So adventure travel are experiences that involve three elements: being active, spending time in nature, and interacting with the local culture. This is important in the aspect of our conversation today, thriving in a future world in the context of adventure travel. As I mentioned, today we have David Beurle from FutureIQ, and I would like to pass the mic to him for an introduction. Dave.
Okay, well, thank you, Gergana. Nice to be here. Look, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with you today. So my name is David Beurle. I'm with FutureIQ. So we're a company that is a research and consulting company, and essentially we help people plan for the future. And our footprint primarily is North America, Europe, and a little bit of Australia. And we do a fair bit of work in tourism economies. So a lot of our work is on the ground with regional and rural tourism destinations. And I think what I'm really looking forward to today in the discussion is what you bring, obviously, is this enormous perspective about the travel industry. And what I have, I think, is this really good perspective on what destinations are dealing with on the ground. And that it really is to the heart of this whole notion of sustainability, resilience, and all those type of issues, is how do you get those two pieces of that equation just right. Some of the current work we're doing is we're doing a lot of work in New England, so the northern sort of 6 states of the US, northeastern corner, but also through the Rocky Mountains, so near Lake Tahoe in California, Moab in Utah, across a range of tourism destination planning projects and community visioning projects, really trying to help local people figure out the puzzle of how do they evolve and guide their tourism industry. So I very much look forward to our discussion, so thank you.
This is fantastic, great background, and definitely super interesting and important work. We at the ATTA have research and anecdotal evidence that points that adventure tourism is returning earlier and stronger than other forms of tourism based on consumer trends that have shifted due to the pandemic, and also aligning to the definition that I just mentioned about adventure travel being nature, culture, and human-powered activities and transformative, meaningful, spending meaningful time in a destination. So we also see that people want to travel safely in smaller groups. They're more sensitive toward nature and wildlife, and do more good than harm the destination. Is this in line with the kind of trends that you're seeing?
Well, certainly. I think the destinations I work in are primarily what you would call rural or regional communities. So generally fairly small, and typically have a history in a resource-based economy. So they're in landscapes, in other words, right? So it's either, sort of farming, forestry, maybe minerals and so on. But they're very much economies and cultures that have been embedded in that landscape economy. And of course, at a first glance, outdoor recreation, adventure travel is a perfect fit for that, because that's what people are looking for, is that the amenities of often very beautiful landscapes, and the ability to be able to go and explore and adventure and recreate and so on, right? I think the challenge at the moment is that there's this sort of disconnect between where a lot of communities have relatively small infrastructure because they're small communities historically, but they're really reeling with the influx of large numbers of people. And that's been somewhat accelerated by the pandemic as more tourism, at least in North America, which is what I'm referencing now, where it's become more domestic oriented because people haven't been able to travel overseas. And that's creating some real challenges at a local level. But I do think that outdoor recreation and adventure travel is a key part of the solution, right? So people are coming, but the very things you talked about, Gergana, so things like the connection to nature, interest in culture, wanting to have meaningful experiences, wanting to sort of do good, that is the perfect visitor or traveller for those destinations. But how they manage that in numbers is really the challenge. But I think it's a perfect fit, actually.
Thank you very much. And yes, I thank you for this. And what we see more and more happening is that transition from DMOs, destination marketing agencies, into DMMOs, so that they can manage that bigger number of travelers. And how do you manage these crowds? So thank you for this. And since we are both mentioning sustainability and responsible travel, regarding sustainability and climate action in tourism, do you see the perception of adventure tourism's role in responsibilities evolving, and if so, how?
Look, I think that's a fascinating question. I mean, there's obviously a huge amount going on right now in terms of people talking about the evolution of travel from all sorts of scales. The macro scale of talking about the impact of air travel, down to local impacts. I think the big evolution that is really interesting to me. So first of all, I should say that I think the industry, through organisations like yours, is doing a really great job in trying to make travel more sustainable and be able to manage its impact on local communities and on local landscapes and environment. I mean, I think the work ATT and others do is absolutely critical to building that long-term sustainable travel industry. And of course, it's very exciting for people to be part of a solution and so on. I think the bigger issue, however, the one that I see as a concern for a lot of communities is how do we truly educate visitors to be part of a solution, rather than that they're the problem, right? And while your sector may deal with a lot of enlightened travellers and people who are interested in doing the right thing, there are a lot of travellers who are just out there for their own experience, right? And they're much more like consumers of destinations. So I think the larger challenge, if you think of it in terms of sustainability, and I'm talking about in the broad dimensions of impact on communities, local economic benefit and so on, right the way up to the sort of macro levels. The big issue is going to be, I think, how do travellers evolve over time? I mean, how important really is it for somebody who's on holidays or vacation to go and do the right thing? And I would argue that until perhaps recently, that's probably not been the case, right? Most people are in just I don't care, it's a mass consumption sort of an experience, right? But I do think for truly to move the needle on travel, we do have to shift that so that travellers are much more conscious of what they're doing and their impact and what the role they have to play is, right? And you see that coming through in things like pledges and so on. But I think the challenge is going to be, how do we take the sort of philosophies that you talked about, Gergana, and amplify those across all types of visitation and all types of travel? But I think the work you're doing is really at the forefront of thinking about how does the industry be part of educating travellers so that when they go somewhere, right at the forefront of their mind is, this is my chance to contribute to sustainability. This is my chance to be responsible, to understand what the local norms and behaviours are, what the expectations of me are. I can enjoy myself, but I need to be part of the solution.
Thank you, David. Cannot agree more. And it's also exciting to see, probably because of the the COVID-19 pandemic, people were able to slow down and think of also about flipping the responsibility more also on destinations and offering sustainability by default. This is something that lately I start seeing and reading about. So it is exciting, and I hope that this will be really the way forward. Um, Other things that we hear and we read about and also with ATTA's work with destination managers and tourism boards, we see higher engagement and expectation from the community level with regards to traveler responsibility. An example of that, actually 2 months ago, when I was in Barcelona, I saw that they issued their new purpose statement about bringing well-being to the community through travel values. Can you share some examples of the shift in the relationship between communities and travelers, and whether you think these efforts will be effective in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great topic, right? It's something that I'm actually fascinated by, which is how do you change behaviour, right? That's ultimately what's at the core of it. There is, I think, some really interesting work going on, which is part of what you touched on, right? Which is this macro pivot from marketing destinations to talking about destination impact management. So the shift from DMOs to DMMOs, right? So marketing and management sort of organizations. And the management part is really impact management at the level of destinations. So more simply, every destination I'm working with is figuring out what does that shift look like if we're going to sort of less marketing trying to attract people and more about impact management. How does that work, and what are our tools that we have in our toolbox? So I'm seeing a lot of, say, for example, visitor-facing websites, for example, are shifting the messaging quite dramatically. So moving to talk a lot more about the roles and responsibilities, inviting people to become part of pledges and so on. Some very good examples of pledges being developed that are about sort of laying down a code of conduct essentially and providing solutions so that the visitor can be part, and they know what to do if they want to be part of a solution. So I think that's quite exciting. Now, I think we're too early yet to see how much that will change sort of behaviour over time, but organisations like Leave No Trace and all those sort of efforts, they have got a lot of traction, and I do think it creates a larger context. The other thing that I am starting to see, which I think should be of great interest to the industry, is that destinations are now starting to move to think about control. And that has probably been more prevalent in Europe. So, there's been more of a history of thinking about how we manage and guide and control tourism. So even thinking about numbers and limitations. I mean, national parks, state parks, those sort of things have been doing that for years. But it's never really been in the toolbox of individual communities. Yet the work I'm doing right now across communities in, as I said, New England, Rocky Mountains, Pacific Northwest and in North America, communities definitely have in their toolbox now, they are putting in control measures. So it's really the first time I've ever seen communities being willing to really sit down and say, okay, where do we want tourism, where don't we? And it's really starting to demarcate those lines between residential areas, recreation areas. A lot more investment going into trailheads, wayfinding, signage, to be able to distribute impact, separating motorised and non-motorised. So you made the comment earlier about human-powered travel. Well, there's a lot of motorised recreation as well in some locations. So creating clear separations between those. And I think that there's real momentum around that. I mean, I think people struggle to take that on and say, yep, we're going to put, draw a line here. But communities are leaning into it. And I think we're going to see those systems become much more sophisticated, much faster. And I think, quite frankly, I think it's a fantastic part of the solution, right? Because if you don't deal with that, if you don't have the control piece in your toolbox, you're going to end up with resident alienation quite quickly. And then that's a net loss for everybody, for the industry, for the traveller, for the communities and so on. So I think extra numbers, greater impact is leading people to think about how do we expand our toolbox to manage that. Messaging is one, pledges, communication and so on, but then having also the components to be able to set aside important environmentally sensitive areas or residential areas and so on, and be able to separate those out, I think should be really welcomed by the industry, because it's going to be a solution for a lot of people.
Yes, totally agree, and great points. And definitely technology here comes as a great friend to our industry, as we see more and more solutions coming up around this. And we've seen quite some sad moments pre-pandemic with different destinations, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and a few others, where really local people did not want tourism. So definitely the management aspect is very important, and for communities, for the local communities to be part of the solutions. And the other point that I wanted to make around this is from Europe specifically, we know in the Nordics, the freedom to roam is a great opportunity, but also it brings its complexities that everyone is allowed to go anywhere. So how do you control this and making sure that the locals and the nature is protected? Thank you for this. And I'm very curious to hear, what is Adventures Travel role in building future resilience based on your expertise and global experience?
Yeah, I think we've hit on a lot of that, because I really do, in my mind, I have resilience and sustainability very much parts of the same story, because to be resilient and to be able to provide an ongoing tourism economy is going to require that we address the elements of sustainability, and I mean at the level of the environment and at the level of the communities and the local economies. But I do think that we're in this period where there is so much evolution occurring, right? I mean, there is so much debate, right? And on so many different issues right across the planet. And so I do think it'll be very interesting to see how it ultimately plays out. I wonder whether for a lot of our rural and regional economies, whether things like outdoor recreation, adventure travel, whether they don't become more important. Because I think those sectors have at the forefront a lot of sort of philosophy and ethics and broader considerations very much in the forefront of your mind. So, and you've talked about that, and I think that's well sort of communicated. I do think that the types of visitation that are more exploitive of communities will start to fade away, because they're just not as attractive to communities. What communities are trying to figure out is, how do we have the economic benefit that tourism brings, but without the destructive impacts on communities? And if you look across the whole broad range of sort of types of travel, adventure travel, outdoor recreation, have a very strong empathy potentially with those cultures in those regional and rural destinations. So I think that's why some of those destinations are leaning into that type of economy so strongly, because they understand it, right? It feels like a match, right? But I do think at a broader level, that is the opportunity for some really interesting education and sort of cultural exchange between visitors and local economies. If you can get the scale right, you have the chance to have a more intimate experience both ways, with the community with the visitors with the community. And it does seem that what's coming to the forefront is that's what people are craving. People are coming out of this pandemic, heightened sort of sensitivity to a whole range of issues. And I see across the board, people are looking for more intimate, more meaningful types of experiences. What's going to come with that, though, is scale, and they may not be as easy to get hold of. They may cost more. They may not be as frequent to be able to experience. But I think that's where the industry is going.
Great, thank you very much. So this kind of goes back to the very first question from where we started about what is the also speaking of the future and the importance of adventure travel, and that we see that growth. Thank you so much for these insights and for sharing your experience. Do you have any other closing remarks that you would like to share?
No, I just really want to compliment you on the work you do, right, in terms of ATTA, but also the travel trade sort of industry in large. I mean, I do think I have observed that sector leaning so strongly into trying to figure out how to evolve, how to provide a better experience, and how to interface with destinations in a really sort of intimate and sustainable manner. So I think it's on the right track.
Thank you. It's been a journey for sure. So, and we rely experts like you to help us support our future. Thank you so much, David. It was a great pleasure to speak with you today.
Likewise, thank you very much.
Thank you.